Since our last show was filmed on the Fisk University campus, I'd like to start with reading a passage about Fisk, where my parents were on the faculty and where I grew up. My parents both attended Fisk as undergraduates. They saw each other as rivals while they were piano students. Both went elsewhere for graduate school, he to Juilliard, she to Oberlin. When they both returned to teach at Fisk, the sound of wedding bells was not far off. My father took the role as director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers in 1957, when his predecessor, John W. Work III, fell ill. Before then, he had served as piano accompanist for the group when it was directed by Mrs. James A. Myers while he was an undergrad. When my father served his country in World War II, my mother was piano accompanist under John W. Work. When my parents married in 1956, it was the talk of the campus. Charles S. Johnson, grandfather of the former Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama, J. Charles Johnson, was the first black president of Fisk. Gave my parents their wedding, since my mother's father had been killed when she was a child. The Johnsons admired my mother's playing and were pleased and honored to have her on the faculty at Fisk. When I was born 4 years later, my parents later told me that I had to be placed at the front of the display room for newborns in the hospital because so many came in asking to see the Kennedy baby. Jokes and insinuations abounded that I would be a child prodigy. When asked if they had a boy or girl, their answer was, "It's a pianist." And so it was. I would observe them teaching their students during their lessons and would memorize the pieces they were learning. My ear was so overly developed, and no one realized that I could not see the sheet music placed in front of me. I wouldn't get my glasses until I was 9 years old, because a teacher from school called to tell my parents that I couldn't see the blackboard. So for the first 9 years of my life, I never saw the stars. My parents were the kind of socially responsible citizens who felt it necessary to integrate previously segregated restaurants. We, as a family, attempted to enter Morrison's cafeteria when I was very small. The first time, the manager of the restaurant blocked the door with his body and bellowed, "You can't come in here. This is a Southern chain." Such intimidation did not stop my parents. They kept coming back until we were finally allowed to order our food and sit at a table. I'm sure that some of the staff were happy to see us, and some of them weren't. Morrison's was close to the Fisk campus, so it was convenient for us to be able to go there for dinner. I don't remember the exact details of all that was happening. However, I do remember the stress my parents were feeling based on their body language and their insistence that I be on my absolute best behavior, which meant no loud talking and no getting up and running around. Other white children were running around and playing, but I was not allowed that privilege. It made me wonder what was so special about them that they got to laugh and play and be loud, and I didn't. Occasionally, my mother would bring me into Fisk Jubilee Singers rehearsals, which took place during the evenings. I was always very popular with the students. They would run over to pick me up and put me on their laps. I remember one incident at home when I wanted to sit in my father's lap. He was sitting in the big green lounge chair, and I put my hands on his knees, trying to climb up. But he looked down at me like I was a stranger. I knew that other people seemed to enjoy lifting me up and placing me in their laps, but evidently he was uncomfortable with that kind of affection. I never saw him display any physical affection toward any child. I was always an only child. My parents were both 40 years old when I was born, so the children of their friends and colleagues were much older than I was. They lived in a house on campus when I was born, and then moved to a house in the suburbs when I was 3 years old. My mother had bought that house during one of her many emotional breakdowns, which would put her in the hospital for a rest. She had seen the ad for the house and the newspaper and made a down payment without consulting her husband. She felt that the way their old neighborhood had deteriorated was a contributing factor in her breakdown. Their marriage suffered greatly as a result of her insistence on moving. If you would like to see more clips from the Noshing with Nina show, make sure to subscribe and click on the notification bell.